Greg Middleton was the cinematographer on half of the episodes of HBO's Watchmen. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Greg now. And I first off just wanted to ask about your relationship to Watchmen as a property before you got involved with the show.
Well, I read the comic initially when I was quite young, and then when the film of 2010 came out, I reread it again, and I was quite amazed at how, being older, reading it again, how impressed I was with it, how complicated it was, how just how kind of nuanced the writing was, and I don't think it really sank in when I read it when I was younger, and that's when I first became aware of what a great piece of material it was, and of course the film was very impressive. So that was how I first came in contact with it, and really remembered that it was really quite something, quite an accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. So what were the conversations with David Lindelof and the other producers and directors just about the overall visual style? Because there's a lot of different looks here that we see through the season, and I'm sure we'll get to that, but it still, oddly enough, feels very of a piece at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, that's hopefully, well, I'm glad you said that, because hopefully was what the intent was, to make sure it did feel like it was of a piece. I think there's two parts to that question. The first part is style, and one of the things that was very interested, there was a bunch of people in this conversation, Damon obviously, and Nicole Cassell, who directed the pilot and episodes 2 and 8, Stephen Williams, who's the other producing director, and our new production designer Christian Milstead. And one of the things that we did when we started the series, which was, because I did not shoot the pilot, but we ended up reshooting about 30% of it. They recast the character, and they changed some things. They built some bigger sets, like the police station set was built after they shot the pilot, for example. And that was a real opportunity after seeing the pilot to sort of break down what they'd done on the pilot, and pick the ideas that worked and the stylistic things they wanted to keep going, and look for new opportunities to bring in more distinct style elements, either from the comic or something that could be similar from the comic. So we sort of did a breakdown of various visual ideas that are in the graphic novel, and also in comics in general, to try and bring in and then apply those to the sort of reshoots of the pilot and the show. And then we also knew there was going to be, there's at least 2 parallel stories. We started the series we were aware of. I knew there'd be the American Hero Story television show, like the show within a show, which was sort of like paralleling in some ways, like the Black Freighter thing of the story of the graphic novel. And that had to have its own distinct look. And then we were going to have several types of flashbacks. So we did want them to all feel a bit different. But one thing that I was determined to do is to not try and make them so distinct and so affected photographically that it was distracting, and try and make them different enough so that they could be distinct, but not to make it too manipulated looking, especially in color correction. So we sort of started with those worlds to separate them all. But the style elements were interesting. Things like using occasional use of split diopters or of swing and tilt lenses to do foreground background compositions. And we looked at a lot of transitions. There's a lot of really interesting transitions in Watchmen graphic novel. There's a lot of match cuts where a character is in the frame, in one moment, and then, in the next frame, they're somewhere else in a different costume, and time has passed. And it's sort of an idea of you're going with this sort of emotional, the emotional or character point of view of time. You're like, okay, well, I'm thinking about this, and this is when it's going to come up next, and you're just jump to that point. And by doing the character in the same position and frame, it's a match cut exactly. And we did that a few times in the show with in various times, and also use that as a way to sort of, in those scenes where you just want to jump ahead to the next moment, where this character would be thinking about something. As Regina King, a couple times there's a match cut with her. There's a match cut in episode 2, and she's walking away from the oak tree after discussing what they're going to do about rounding up more suspects for Judd's murder, and it's a match cut on her walking, and she's in the same position frame, and boom, and she's right away walking up to the Nixonville slum area where the arrests are going to take place. And so we use those ideas, and also they're interesting in the comic because there's a whole element of how they relate to how Dr. Manhattan experiences time, which is but sort of jumping through time and jumping through things and experience them simultaneously. So we tried to bring a lot of those ideas into how we would shoot the scenes. And then it was a separate thing of trying to figure out how to make the language of the various flashback areas distinct, and also what would the palette of the whole show be like in terms of color. Christian Milstead had worked on the UK show Utopia, if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. So it was beautiful looking show and a lot of interesting stuff, but a lot of it was done with omission of certain types of colors. So you could really control how something could look just by making everything one color or making it too broad, but just by eliminating certain things. And we tried to do that a lot in the Watchmen world in a similar way that the graphic novel is a commentary on comics of the time, and they did a lot of things with the not just with the writing, but with the way it was laid out and the way it was colored specifically. It was very different than you would see in the in regular comics, which were more primary colors. They used a lot of secondaries in the Watchmen. So then the physical look of the Watchmen comic is kind of an interesting critique of the comics. And we don't want to do, and we toyed with the idea of doing something like that with our show, but then it would have been, the context wouldn't have been visible. You would have been wondering, it would have been an interesting looking palette, but it would have been strange. And obviously in the graphic novel, they can color things. They can color a character totally one colors if that's the color light on them, and they don't have to worry about throwing light on a purple dress and how it's going to look. There's different types of things you can do with with physical color than what you can with lighting color. And I didn't want to get into something that was so stylized like that, what might have felt non-realistic. And it also is Watchmen's also a film noir, and we wanted to bring a lot of film noir elements into it. And some of that means a certain amount of realism, but basically kept the lighting more with a lot more contrast and a lot more film noir elements. And we were careful with the palette to sort of remove certain colors, keep a lot of the primaries out, except for yellow we used quite a bit. And then we used those primary colors in the American Hero Story TV show, which is sort of a heightened reality anyways. It wants to be like a more extreme, fake, romanticized version of the original Minutemen and Hooded Justice. So we thought that would be a good way to split that and those two looks. And it allowed our main look for the sort of Watchmen world to be more, to still feel kind of grounded and real, because that was part of the idea. This sort of slightly absurdist stuff happening, but still it should still feel fairly real. And I think that would keep the feeling of the more intense. It sort of felt a bit like the real world, even though there's a lot of elements like design-wise that were separate. So there was a sort of multi-pronged thing, and that was all. We started that in episode 2, and we just kept developing as we went along. We actually didn't know about all the looks at the beginning. We didn't have our scripts to the very end. So there were other worlds came up as it went along, which made it a bit more complicated, like the black and white episode, which was another element, and then flashbacks in different time periods. So,
yeah. Well, you already touched a little bit on the American Hero Story, which I was going to ask about episode 2 there. But for episode 4, I wanted, since that's a very memorable episode for me, where it has a very iconic scene of Angela chasing a guy in spandex, who I believe was called Lube Man. who slides right into the gutter. Such a memorable scene. Can you just talk about approaching that scene?
Yeah, that scene is very, people all remember that scene. When we shot the scene, it was pretty damn hilarious when we finally saw it cut together. It was very funny. I think it's called Lube Man because that's what Red Scare refers to him as later in the scene in the police station. So, I mean, one thing that I really admire about the way Damon writes is, I mean, he's one of the key elements of how he writes is he is an entertainer. He wants to write stuff that's both constantly surprising and entertaining throughout his scripts, and he has a great sense of pacing. So from a story standpoint, it's going to be, we're going to notice that she is disposing of Old Man Will's wheelchair, and there's a witness to it. Well, obviously she's doing this in lead act, and there's obviously stakes involved in that. So that's sort of just essentially the story. But also you're Damon's trying to also make people aware, like, what the hell could be going on in this world. Like, I mean, there could be a weird character around the corner anywhere, and you have no idea what's going on. Like, it's quite mysterious and also completely silly, which is what makes it hilarious. So it's on both kind of, it's like, it is a moment of tension in some ways, but it's also hysterical. So Megan, the costume designer, and I were reading the scene, and she was trying, and she's an amazing costume designer. And the costumes, you can see, are fantastic, and even like the work on the Blonde Man world with Jeremy Irons, and the costumes were really, really wonderful. And Megan was always trying to make his outfit look really cool looking. And of course, the notes keep coming back into it just looks sillier and sillier. And she wanted more texture on it to make it look, really high tech and stuff. And no, it just really should be probably just plain silver spandex, just like completely ridiculous with big goggles. And that's because I sort of figured that's exactly what Damon wanted. And we figured out how to do this slide into the drain to make it look kind of ridiculous and make him, he just fit like a little mail slot. And we only had one day to shoot the scene, including the scene of throwing the stuff off the bridge. All that was done on one day. So we had to pick a location that was close together, and it was a very tight day because it was later in the year, so it was getting dark quite early. But we had 9.5 hours, I think, to shoot all that material. And we used various types of camera rigs, lever heads on motors and golf carts, and a very fit actor who could run around in the spandex suit. And it was a hysterical thing. Everything was to keep it in motion, to keep it running like crazy, and to have all that happening on the move, and to see him squirting himself. I've been wondering what the F could be going on. And then it's just a ridiculous surprise when he slips into this thing. It looks totally insane. And yeah, I mean, it was the first time I saw that when Andre, the director, showed me the cut. The first time he showed it to me, I mean, we could not stop laughing. I mean, it was just, and it was one of these scenes where, even most shows, you never have enough time or enough money. It doesn't matter what type of project you're on. There's always going to be a push to, constrain the budget or trying to figure out how to get the most for the money. And that scene, because it was a story standpoint, wasn't really super important. It seemed like the first one on the chopping block. Like, all the producers are like, we got to get rid of this. It's going to be a whole day's work. It's for 2 minutes. It doesn't really advance the story. And Damon's like, nope, we got to do it. We got to do it. And I was like, I could tell. So there's got to be a real reason he wants it. And seeing it in the episode and seeing and the reaction to it, it's like, that's why. It was like, this is, that scene was going to stay no matter what, because of what it did at the time. So to change the energy, it raised all these questions, and that was enough. And that was enough to make it earn its place in the story.
Yeah. And you also, as you alluded to earlier, did two of the most ambitious episodes of the season. This Extraordinary Being, which is episode 6, which is the black and white flashback, extended flashback. And then episode 8, A God Walks into a Bar, one with Dr. Manhattan, that big episode. I mean, what was your approach to both of those, and what was your reaction to knowing that this big undertaking you would have to undertake?
Well, I mean, equal parts terror and excitement, I think, are the usual way. I mean, that's the I've been very fortunate to get some really, really good opportunities with great story material before, and I felt incredibly lucky to get those two scripts. And well, one also because 6 is also such an integral thing to what the story of the whole season's about, because there is an arc to the entire season in terms of story, in terms of Old Man Will's relationship with Angela, and that's really what it's really about. And that's what it's about, her understanding like why she is the way she is, maybe, and how to change herself moving forward, so she's doesn't live a whole life of revenge like that Will had done. And episode 6 is a key element of telling that part of the story. It was also amazingly ambitious, and then and not just because it was all flashbacks, but to do the memory kill sections in a sort of continuous from floating field if you're really with him. And I think the references were things like not like the Revenant, but sorry, I'm just blanking for a second. Hope you can cut this part out. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind was one reference, and Birdman being another reference for sort of continuous camera and these sort of surreal touches of knowing that the reality was bent, like things appearing out of nowhere and doors in the middle of the street, things like that. So I was incredibly excited to get the episode, and it felt like such an important story part of the season. And we're determined to make it as good as we possibly could. It did come after our Christmas hiatus. We had a slightly longer hiatus where they were catching up on some post and doing some other stuff. So I had a bit longer prep, actually, which is very helpful. That episode could not have happened if we hadn't had a bit more prep than a usual episode. So it just happened to fall after the Christmas break, which is very useful. And yeah, I was just determined to make it as unique as possible and as distinct as possible in the ways that were inspired in the script. Stephen Williams, the director, and I, it was the first time working together. We've been aware of each other for many times. We have a lot of friends in common. But neither of us had done something quite like this in terms of work. Like I've done continuous shots before in shows, but not something that's like about 20 or 30 minutes of continuous work all together and to plan it out. And so it was an opportunity to try a few techniques that I'd always wanted to try in prep. You often storyboard sequences with visual effects, or you can do things with the director. I'll do photo boards sometimes where we'll walk around the location with the scene, with stand-ins, or just with me, the AD when we're scouting, and we'll we'll take photographs and try and build some visual ideas, with still pictures before we come to shoot the scene. But in this case, with all the blocking and the motion of everybody moving, I want to sort of bump that up and basically do our scouts with stand-ins that had the script and could be off book. And I, use my Artemis director's viewfinder on video mode, and we just start shooting, blockings and figuring out what the shots could be in prep. Because each shot was so complex to pull off, technically, that you couldn't sort of make that up in the day and start to figure out how to do it. I mean, all the lighting had to be really well planned in advance because we're doing wandering shots through streets, and also more importantly, I wanted to make sure the transitions would work. And so we shot them all on video, did a few versions of each scene, figured out what the pace was going to be, and Steven would move the actors around. We'd change when the beats happened, time it out, see how long it would be. And we shot them all like that. And then we edited them all together, just the video test, to sort of as a proof of concept to see if it would really work and if it felt right. And that was a hugely important thing. We made some changes to the scenes in that circumstance. It allowed us to kind of know that it was going to come up, that it was going to work if we could pull off each shot. And then it would give you the time to sort of work out, technically how to do each shot, because it was some of these shots were 2 or 3 or 4 minutes long. And they're really, really complex in terms of camera motion and cranes and a lot of moving parts. There's pieces of set going in and out behind camera. And to choreograph all that in advance was the only way to really do it. And it was an amazingly exciting experience to do, because you could see once you get a take right, you know that that's going to be in the show. Often when you do a lot of coverage in a scene, sometimes you'll see moments that you think will be in the cut when you watch a performance and see a great moment being captured. But when there's a lot of people and leverage, you don't always know what beat's going to get there, and sometimes great moments can't get in the scene. In this case, all the great moments had to happen in the one take because there was almost no opportunity to cut takes together. There's a few little cuts occasionally in it that blended takes together, but then you really are looking for a great performance and a great technical performance all at the same time, and it creates a really intense and exciting energy for everybody, the crew and actors. Each shot's very difficult to pull off, and it's a big team. And it's we get one right, and you can play it back, you can move on. And that was it's a really, really great way to work. I think it's really exciting for everybody to know that what you're doing, it's really going to be this take is going to be it. So once you get a really great one, it's going to be in the show. And then you have to feel confidence, and you can watch them back, you're going into the next scene. You know what you've just done before, and you kind of know the pace of it and the flow of it. Whereas when you're editing a whole episode, you don't quite know how the pace of that scene is going to be before when you shoot the next one. In this case, you really can see it's where the camera is moving, what just happened, the energy. And so it really helps you fine tune the energy of the camera and the energy of the pacing and the following scene as well shooting. So it was amazingly exciting experience and incredibly challenging, and a harrowing episode with all the, the violence and the horror that he goes through.
Yeah. You certainly did phenomenal work on this series. I congratulate you for that. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Greg. It was a real pleasure.
Oh, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thanks for interest in the show, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And for those watching, hit like and subscribe for more interviews just like this, and head to goldderby.com to make your predictions. Thanks again.